You have to keep running, otherwise you're going to get caught or you're going to get eaten or whatever. In BigMachines, we'd been around 13 years, and at that point, like, you're in like mile 24 of the marathon. Everyone's just kind of tired, and we're just like, let's be done with this.
Trust the playbook. I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fearful Giants, the podcast that's getting loud about something most leaders never talk about out loud, their fear. I'm Clay Stelzer, executive coach and founder of the executive coaching company 1560. And every week I sit down with a founder, a CEO, or an executive leader to talk about the stuff they're not typically posting about on LinkedIn. And today I'm really excited. Chris Schutz is here with me. And if you don't know Chris is a software engineer and a category creator. I haven't interviewed too many category creators before. He's best known for co-founding BigMachines, one of the first companies to define the category known as CPQ, or Configure Price Quote. And he transformed how complex products are sold in this new category. So Chris helped grow BigMachines into a market leader before its successful acquisition by Oracle. And then after leaving Oracle, Chris wasn't done. He came back to it and built a company called Logik.io, later called Logik.ai, bringing a modern approach to configuration and guided selling. And again, he scaled the company and last year sold it to ServiceNow. Not too shabby, Chris. Anyway, when Chris is not building and selling successful software companies, he's probably in his garage working on classic cars or spending time with family. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you always. So I just want to jump right in. So you've done what many people dream of doing. I don't know how else to say it. So many people dream of starting and growing and exiting a successful tech company. And as you know, most of these people fail. And you've done this successfully twice. So point of the show is not to blow up people's egos. I'm not going to do that. Or maybe I'll do it a little bit. But I'm just curious, what's the significance of that in your mind? Having done the thing that is so hard that so many people want to do twice. What's the significance of that to you?
Well, I think it takes a lot of luck. I think it's when you build these companies, and when we started BigMachines, we had kind of like totally the wrong idea. I did it with Godard, who's a longtime friend of mine. He runs a great company called G2 now. We started BigMachines, and we didn't really know what we were doing, and we had like kind of a crazy idea with like a marketplace, and we eventually transformed the company into a software business, enterprise software business, and we didn't know how to sell, we didn't know how to support it, and we stubbed our toe a lot along the years, and it eventually took us 13 years, and Godard actually left the business to start G2, and then we were lucky enough to sell it to Oracle. So I think it was a little bit of like just staying in the grind and just making it happen at all costs and not giving up. But it also took a lot of luck, and the space matured and all of that stuff, which kind of really helped us. And then I think, the fact that it happened again with ServiceNow, we're very fortunate. And I think part of that is just the space is still really complicated and a lot of companies weren't evolving. It's sort of weird if you look at like tech, like ERP and stuff, how ERP, for example, kind of came to fruition and matured a lot and companies everywhere ran it and it got better and better and more efficient and more helpful for companies. And I think CPQ actually sort of grew and then kind of stalled out. And then that made an opportunity for us to kind of do it all over again. And which is sort of why we kind of had a second outcome. But I think it does take a lot of luck because I know a lot of people that build great companies, very smart with great teams and great products, and it still doesn't go their way, So I think there's that term you kind of hear, like, I'd rather be lucky than good. I think that sort of does apply a little bit. So,
yeah. Okay. So you did it again with Logik, and you were in a different life stage. You had a different role. You were the CEO, kind of the sole CEO in Logik. You weren't that with BigMachines. I just wonder how the achievement felt different for you, exiting BigMachines versus exiting Logik. Early in your career, later in your career, different role. What was the difference in those two exits for you personally?
Well, I think for me, I always wanted to be a CEO and kind of prove to myself I could do it. So that was a big driver for me. And I think because of that, we built a great company with Logic. It's doing great inside of ServiceNow. The numbers are all up and to the right, which is awesome. And ServiceNow is a great company to be a part of. Great culture. By the way, it was a lot bigger deal. Just it was a lot bigger deal just in terms of like emotional. Should we really sell it? Does it make sense? The board was roughly aligned, but there was a lot of discussions like, should we do it? Can we go further? Can we make it bigger? Is it the right outcome for the team? All of those conversations were a lot more meaningful this time. In Big Machines, we'd been around 13 years. And at that point, like, you're in like mile 24 of the marathon. Everyone's just kind of tired. And we're just like, let's be done with this.
Yeah.
And we were still accelerating, as part of Logic. And that definitely put a different context on the decision to do it ultimately.
Yeah. You talked about proving to yourself that you could do it. So I have to imagine there was a little something extra in having ServiceNow acquire Logic. Did you prove to yourself that you could do it? Like, did that come to fruition?
It did, because the transaction, like we had, as Big Machines was interesting because we had learned a lot about like what not to do. And along the way, we had, learned a lot about engineering and had the right people in the Rolodex to call, legal matters, HR matters, finance matters. And so we knew there were a lot of things that the team knew not to do and things to make sure that we had to do so that we were really building a real company that could, because our goal was to eventually get to $1 billion in enterprise value. And we got a good chunk of the way there. But we had put all this stuff together, which actually had created a very clean company from an acquisition standpoint. So all the things that happen, it's a grind of a process where the due diligence, where they go through every customer contract and figure out what you committed to, all your liabilities. Do you have any outstanding legal issues, HR issues? I mean, it's a lot of stuff. And we had largely planned for that and made sure to avoid, most of that. So it was a pretty clean business from that standpoint and a pretty straightforward transaction. And the ServiceNow team was, very accommodating, along the way. I think they saw what they wanted and they were, made it a very easy transaction just mechanically to conduct it. And I think I see a lot of entrepreneurs today that have great ideas early in their career. And, there's certainly it would it would be nice to be able to like have these open conversations with them now so they don't make a lot of the mistakes that we made because we made a lot of them along the way.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's funny you say that. That's in part why we have this podcast. And not only just to have people learn from you around what to do and what not to do around the content of your business, but around the emotional side of being an entrepreneur, like the soft side of leadership. That's the stuff that I don't think it's talked about nearly as much. So we're going to do that. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about Big Machines. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about Logic, and then we're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about, it's called Fearful Giants, the show. I'm going to try to get under the hood and learn a little bit about what was happening within you as you were navigating all these different adventures. So let's talk a little bit about Big Machines first. So in my mind, it's scary enough to be an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur, but you decided to do this selling a category to the public that didn't exist. Like you were selling something people didn't get, which adds an entire new level of ambiguity and uncertainty and risk in the entrepreneurial journey. What was that like for you, kind of jumping in, selling something that people couldn't yet conceptualize?
yeah, well, it was tough. I mean, we had a couple of years where we maybe did like one deal, two deals, and we had to like downsize quite a bit, conserve cash. It was pretty tough in like 2002, 2003. We were down to, I think, high 20s in terms of headcount. And we were, trying to figure out how to sell it. And we were largely selling to a pretty risk adverse group, largely manufacturers that didn't really understand cloud. And then a couple of things started to kind of go our way. So one was Salesforce was creating quite a big wake with cloud adoption in general. So that kind of checked that box for us. And then we started to do a lot of deals outside of manufacturing, like with high tech companies. And the high tech companies tend to be a lot more adopting of new ideas and concepts, and they're not quite as risk averse. And so that really helped us. And then from there, things really started to take off. And actually, the recession of like 2007, 2008 were some of our highest growth years on a percentage basis at Big Machines. And that was because at that point, we kind of had the messaging down. We'd hired Matt Gorniak to run sales, who did a great job for us. Now runs 3Kit, great business. We gotten the messaging down, the sales execution down. The product was getting pretty good, pretty usable. And so, and companies, even though there was a recession, a lot of the Fortune 1000 companies were looking at that as an opportunity for us to do internal projects and become more efficient. And configure price quote is a great way in a lot of companies to get more efficient if you don't have a good digital front end to your business. And so those things all kind of combined and helped us really start to grow in '07, '08, '09, '10. And then at that point, the business was starting to generate cash. And then we could really scale. And we got up to like, I think it was about 410 people when we sold that company.
Yeah.
And it sort of helped us. The flywheel started to move at that point, which made it a lot easier.
Sure. All right, here's a fun one for you. What was the difference between the Chris who started the company from the Chris who sold the company? 14 years is a long time. You had to learn a lot in that time.
Yeah.
How was Chris at the end different from the Chris at the start?
Well, I think I matured a lot. I wasn't even 30 when we started Big Machines, and I think as I've gotten older, I've definitely sort of mellowed out a little bit, which is really important. I think the other thing that is really important, and I saw this a lot at Logic, where something like scary would happen, like, Salesforce would acquire one of our competitors or something like that. And people tend to like panic. And one of the things I learned over the years is like, things are never as bad as they seem. And when you go back and look at them in 6 months or a year, you realize it's really not that big of a deal. So I think that's a good point. Is I think I sort of mellowed out a lot, which helped because being, I think, a CEO, it takes a lot of patience, because there's just days where just people are kind of tugging you in every direction, and it's easy to get frustrated and
Yeah.
be like, why can't you guys just take care of this? And it's because they don't know how, or they're not sure, they want your opinion. And so I think it takes a lot of patience, which I was generally not a very patient person. And I think I'm getting better at that.
Yeah.
But I think it's like, that's why I tell people, like, it's never as bad as it seems, and
Uh-huh.
I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Just keep that hysteresis in your thought process. And when something bad happens, like, just pause and kind of absorb it and understand it before you act.
Yeah. That's not an easy thing to shift in your mind, especially for young entrepreneurs that are cash strapped. It's like, it's the end of the world. It's into their identity. Like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure if this thing doesn't go. There's no more money, et cetera, et cetera. Yet you had the whereabouts or resources or something to learn that lesson and to employ that skill, patience. Is there anything that you can think of? Was there like a role model that imparted that wisdom upon you? Was there like, how did you mellow is not a word I would typically think about when I think about tech entrepreneurs. Like, how did you learn to mellow out and become patient?
Well, I think it's, Godard is really good at this. Godard Abel. He had this. We had a lot of competitors coming after us over the years, and people would like obsess and talk about our competitors all the time. And he was kind of like, I don't care about the competitors. Like, doesn't matter what they're doing. Like,
Hmm.
let's just serve the customer and figure it out and do the best we can, and we're going to beat them because we're going to out operate this business, and we have a better team and all that stuff. And he was always, because we had a few near death experiences over the years with Big Machines, like really scary ones, like we're out of cash, and he was always very calm about that stuff. So I think that kind of helped. But I think the other piece of it that's also really important to think about is like, if you overreact on that stuff, then you've already lost. So you have to. The only thing you could do is,
Yeah.
if you're going to win, the only thing you do is really like stop and sit back and think through the problem, and then just think
Yeah.
back, like, previous experiences in life. Whenever something weird happens or bad happens, like, it's, a year later, it's like, it's really not that big a deal. And I think that's kind of a good way to think about a lot of stuff in business. So,
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this. A lot of the work I do is helping people see that when you are in that reactive state, you usually make terrible decisions.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we get into that state because we're trying to protect ourselves. And in that same moment, we're making the worst decisions we could be making that usually lead us to the thing we're scared of losing in the first place.
Yeah, it just makes it
So,
worse. It just makes it worse, and, like, that's kind of the problem with, like, a lot of modern communication, like texting and Slack and stuff is, like, a lot of times you're better off just, like, don't answer right now, like, let it sit for half a day or and
yeah,
I tell people that too, like, don't be too tightly wound on your communication,
yeah,
just try to slow down and have some be responsive, especially if it's a customer, but generally speaking, you're better off to kinda let stuff percolate a little bit before you really pounce on it, especially if it's critical,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think, yeah, so that for sure. I think you're also pointing to, you working with Godard, having a partner, not feeling alone. This alone at the top stuff is real. So having a partner that balances you out, I think, is really, really important for entrepreneurs.
yeah,
So it's great that you guys had each other.
and he was always around at Big Machines, at Logic, he had his own very complex business to run, which is really tricky, but he was also available when I needed stuff as well as the board, so we had a fantastic board with Santi from Emergence, Scott from High Alpha. Those guys were available to me anytime I needed them, and probably some of the best operators I've ever seen as far as running these tech businesses. So we were super lucky in that regard, and that helped a lot. You know. So
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about that. So 7 years after you sold Big Machines, you were working at Oracle for a while, and then you decided to get back into the entrepreneurial game. And I don't know this, but I'm imagining you didn't need to. I'm imagining like financially you had plenty. What pulled you back into the game, and taking more risks?
yeah, there were kind of three things. One was I'd never really had a chance as a CEO to take something from zero to an exit, and
Yeah,
I always wanted to do that. And it was very important to me to be able to do that. The second thing, which was probably the most important, was we had developed kind of a sort of a big entrepreneurial family because all these, people over the years at Big Machines, we probably hired 600 people over maybe 700, I don't know. All those people went off and did other things and we built relationships with them and they built companies and they learned stuff and we started looking at this opportunity and we sort of figured out like, well, who could we get to run engineering, run product, run finance, run sales, run marketing? And our top picks in almost every single category were generally available and wanted to do it. And that ended up being really, really important that we sort of had like the exact team we needed right out of the box. That was kind of the second thing and probably the most important thing,
yeah,
which really put a lot of wind in our sails. And then the third thing was something I alluded to earlier, which is the market was not evolving. So it was this weird situation where Oracle had bought the leader, which was Big Machines at the time. And then that sort of incentivized Salesforce to make a move and they bought Steelbrick, which was a very successful company. And then SAP had bought a company and there was some other consolidation stuff happening in CPQ. But all these CPQ companies sort of got absorbed and then nobody did anything with them. So, and then meanwhile, if you look at B2B transactions, the market was changing a lot. So a lot of these companies that sell complex products, it's like, why do I need a sales rep? Why is it a CPQ transaction? Why can't I do discovery online, maybe even transact online? And then, oh, by the way, nobody's applying AI to it. Nobody's making the technology headless. Nobody's making it composable. What if I want to take the C out of my CPQ configuration? I want to put that in Shopify. Nobody's letting me do that. And so
yeah,
we found this sort of perfect storm where like everybody had been ripped off the field and nobody was innovating. Nobody was helping the customer and taking them forward, which opened a huge opportunity for us. And then we had the perfect
yeah,
team. And so we pounced on it, those were kind of the three big things.
yeah. Great. And so you got your chance to do this as the CEO. And what, it was 4.5 years, I think,
Yeah.
from start to finish?
Hmm.
So you did it. You wanted to be a CEO. You wanted to prove to yourself you could do it. Then you did it. Now you're with ServiceNow. How was that experience as the CEO? different than you may have imagined it to be?
Well, it was tough. I mean, it was kind of just 24 hours every day on the thinking about it, obsessing about it. I would get up in the middle of the night, work for a couple hours most nights, which isn't great. You're sort of just always on. Like, the middle of the weekend, like, you get a bill from Google for hosting, and you like grab your chest because it's like, what happened? Why are we spending $250,000 a month on Google all of a sudden? Just stuff like that is just like, it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah.
But I think the the thing I always thought about was like that would be really nice would be if somebody could just like tell you what to work on. So the problem you have is, at least I found as CEO, is that like, and you take notes every day, and there's just like, oh yeah, I should do that. I should do that. It's like your list is just never ending of projects. Like, I should go hire Clay to coach us, for example, is one of those things that was on that list for a long time. And the challenge you have is like, what do you do, right? Like, what do you work on? Because it's all like crazy important. Like, should we spin up like a product led growth process? Should we list on AWS Marketplace? There's all these like huge projects like that, and that could be game changers. And I think what was really startling to me as a CEO is it's just like how to prioritize what to really focus on was really, really tough, and everything you focus on costs capital and time and people's energy, and it's potentially a distraction. And so that's the part that's so hard, is like just figuring out what do you work on,
Yeah.
every day, what's important.
Well,
Yeah.
you talked about, helping young entrepreneurs learn from your mistakes. So if you had some young entrepreneurs listening to the show, I imagine learning how to make decisions and how to prioritize those things is something that they're going to face. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I would make sure you've got a good board in place and a good set of advisors. So we also brought in Ray Grady, who had run an e-commerce business and sold it, very successful. And then Sean Fallon, who had run many, many businesses, had many exits. He was our COO, CFO at BigMachines, excellent operator. And so what I did was I set up these advisors, these kind of trusted advisors. And then I relied on the board to really help with kind of prioritization. And when we had board meetings, I really liked the way we did board meetings. We did a 3-hour meeting. But the first 90 minutes was like a business update where there was a lot of people in the room. And basically we were just briefing the board on what the business was doing, and all the functional leaders would present to the board, which was kind of cool and fun. And then the second half of the board meeting was where we'd really get into like the strategic, like, what do we do? Compensation, should we raise money? How do we manage capital? So we sort of had those two sessions to every board meeting, which worked good. And I used the board meetings to basically ask the board, like, what, should we do in terms of priority? And then we did a weekly kind of leadership meeting where we would talk about, what's kind of important, what people are worried about. But honestly, like, I thought about this a lot, Clay. Like, I think, like, if you could snap your fingers and get one thing, I think it would be for somebody to just like magically prioritize all that stuff for you. I think
Yeah.
if you could magically solve that problem, it's even more important than raising capital, honestly. I think it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really tough.
Well, one of the things I'm really appreciating about what you just said, it's, I've worked with many young entrepreneurs, and oftentimes for many, there's such pressure for so many reasons, but pressure to be right is always there. And I love that you amassed a group of people around you to help guide your decisions. You didn't need to be right. You didn't need to know. You always had an opinion. But I love that you let others guide you to a decision. I think that is critical for folks
Yeah.
with all that pressure to have that support system around you. Yeah.
I think I was a relatively easy person to convince if somebody had a different idea or philosophy or where they wanted to go, with the exception of a couple things. But I did try to listen to people, and I think if they were being rational, I was like, okay, you're right, let's go that way. And I think the best
Yeah.
advice I ever got was somebody said, you can be right or you can be rich. And the point of that comment, point of the comment is not about being rich. It's about like, don't be right just to be right. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
And I still see a lot of people dig in just to be right on something when it's like something that doesn't really matter and it's kind of a destructive outcome. And it's like, why don't you just let the team like go do the research and figure it out and let them come up with an outcome? And it's like it's a really and I think it's a really good piece of advice because I think it holds a lot of people back. You know, it's okay to be
Yeah,
wrong, or it's okay to change your mind.
yeah.
But some people, that's just a really difficult thing for them that holds them back. So
I think that's the case for many people. Yeah, well, I'm glad you didn't let that, lead your decisions and you surrounded yourself with really smart people. So we talked a little bit about this pressure. You were up, in the middle of the night doing work. You said, yeah, maybe not the best idea. Got it. I think most probably relate to that. At some level, I'm kind of curious, was there a point when Logic became not as much of a startup, but more of a responsibility in your mind?
yeah, I think so. I mean, we were about kind of year 3. We had really rounded out the management team. You know, we had hired Casey, Christina Creed to run HR to help Natalie. So we had an awesome HR team. She was kind of the last big add to the management team. And then Blake Grubbs, who ran marketing, he brought in like events people. They're really awesome. And then demand gen. And then Richard had, we built out India. So Richard had a big team for engineering. And things were sort of clicking, but it never felt like, it was easy, especially like bookings, sales, the market. And then just AI is causing a ton of confusion and disruption in the market, as well as Salesforce was doing a lot of disruptive things. Most of them unintentional, but we had, I would say it didn't feel as much like a startup, but it still felt like kind of a scary grind where at any moment you could drive off a cliff and, have a real
Yeah,
problem. So I don't think
yeah,
it never felt like easy, like, running a very mature, 50-year-old business.
yeah. I am, I'm still in all the time we hung out, I don't know if I ever really knew about this waking up at midnight for 2 hours working. And so, that's fear, that's anxiety at some level, you can call it what you wanna call it. But underneath that, what was the driving message? What was the fear that was keeping you up? If you had to name it, what was it?
There were a couple
Like if
things. The growth is tough, right? So that's the big thing where if you get to the point where you're not growing as fast, then the wheels kind of fall off everything. And that always trying to find the next deal, always trying to get the next big add-on,
yeah.
that
But if you were to water all that down, I mean, that all makes sense to me, but if the wheels fall off and then the wheels fall off and the wheels fall off, usually this fear in my experience comes down to a few things. One, business goes away, and that can be scary or that can drive their anxiety. Sometimes it's who am I if the business goes away,
Mhm.
especially if I'm the guy that wanted to prove to myself I could do it. So do you know what the deep-seated energy was around the fear? Was it I would be a failure, or was it just I'd let down the team, or was there anything that you were aware of that was a few layers down?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it in that context because I just was like, we have to make this successful at all costs. That was just sort of the
Yeah,
mission. That was the mission.
right. What do you think about now? Like, what do you think was driving it now that you have some time to ponder? You're not stuck in it.
Well, you kind of hire the team, you build the team, you nurture the team, and you sort of feel a responsibility to them. So that's a
Yeah,
big deal. And we had seen, I think one of the things like you and I talked about, which is very helpful to me, was like context. So when you're having discussion with somebody and you're trying to figure something out, you have to make sure you understand their context, which is an obvious thing in retrospect, but a lot of people don't do it. And one of the things that the context that I always had with companies was, when we were Big Machines, we went through, we laid off, 65% of our workforce one time. That is nearly impossible to recover from. Luckily, we did. But, this was very early in our evolution, but that's a really difficult thing to recover from. It's like your culture gets out of whack and people,
yeah,
aren't sure what to do. And are you going to be around? And is this the right ship to be on? And that provided some kind of fearful context for me with this. And that was something that I never wanted to be in that boat because I was mostly afraid of if we did, I couldn't manage it.
yeah.
Goddard managed it, and I mean, he and I worked on it together, but I wasn't sure I could do that on my own. And that was, in retrospect, that was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. Well, that would keep me up at middle of the night too. I think it would most people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually curious. I love that you bring up this idea of context. I didn't imagine we were going to be talking about this, but I would love for you to, people may not know what you're talking about. What does that mean to you to be aware of the context in which you're discussing things or making decisions in? What does that mean to you?
I think it makes it a lot easier to just understand how to communicate with people, and also to help them understand like the reason why decisions are being done the way they are. Because one of the things that one of the challenges we had at Logic was we sort of had like a bimodal like employee population, right? So it's people like me who are like super old, and then we were like hiring like a lot of really young people who had some experience, 5 or 6 years experience, but their experience in tech has just been like this, you know. So it's like, well, I should have X salary and Y days off and everything's good, and if you guys run out of money, just go get more. That's their context. And my context is, hey, if this doesn't work and we run out of money and we have to, do a riff, like there probably won't be a company anymore, you know.
Yeah.
And if you can understand those two divides, and I'm making an extreme case of it, but those two divides, I think it makes it a lot easier to kind of explain situations like, hey, take more equity, take less salary. Hey, let us get to this next group of milestones, and then we're going to revisit your title and your comp and all that. So there was a lot of discussions over the years around like, what's the work from home strategy? How do we, how much should we pay people? And we spent a lot of time looking at where the market was going, and then we also did a lot with like metrics and benchmarks and how much recurring revenue should we have per employee, things like that, which were helpful. But the market was kind of shifting a lot, so the metrics were sort of hard to follow. But we did use those kind of as guidance and stuff. But the back to your original question though, like I think the context, it's very difficult to communicate with somebody if you're not thinking about their context, like their view of tech going like this. Whereas if I didn't understand that or think about that, I would just sit there and be like, we're all going to die if you take too much salary, and that's not the right way to communicate. And so I think that's where the
Yeah.
context
Yeah.
stuff is important.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you shared about that. And this is a perfect segue because one of the things we did talk a lot about, and I've heard you talk. I think you were thinking about this. I'm imagining for many years, is the culture beats strategy. I heard you talk about this a number of times. What does that mean to you, and why is that important?
yeah, and it's a really interesting phrase. It took me a long time to kind of understand it. And what's interesting is if you have a really good culture, you can pretty much do anything. I mean, there's some exceptions, but if you have a really good winning culture, happy culture, it really makes the whole business run a lot better and is a lot more innovative, and it's a lot happier, and it's easier to recruit. It's easier to close business. Your customers love you more. And the culture is super, super important. And I had learned that firsthand where we had really good culture and then we didn't have good culture at Big Machines, and then we sort of fought our way back from it. And that was, where I learned a lot about that. And then other founders of Logic had also had their own cultural experiences. So we actually spent a lot of time thinking about culture at the very beginning of the company, coming up with our core values. And we kept those core values the same through the whole life of the company. We opened every all hands meeting with it. We opened every board meeting with the core values. And then we did kind of two things that I think were really important for culture, to build a culture. One is we had this thing where you could, and a lot of companies do this now, but you can give praise or kudos to people if they are doing something to like, exhibit your kind of your core values. So like, for example, we hire a new employee, and everyone's very, very helpful getting them onboarded. People from engineering help, from sales engineering, finance, HR, and they get recognized for doing all of those things, which was, we kind of said, was like one team. It's all one team, and the company is one of our core values. And that reinforcement of the core values really helped a lot. And when we sold the company, we had thousands of these kudos. that people had given over the years. And some of them were really fun and interesting to look at, and we celebrated them. And then every all hands meetings, we would rank, we would sort of list the people that gave the most kudos, people that received the most kudos, and we gave out awards for it, which was really fun.
Yeah, yeah,
And that helped reinforce our culture, and it sort of took on a life of its own, which was really cool. So we had, Richard built this like little app inside Slack so we could do it more efficiently, and then people put all these little funny pictures in there and all this stuff, and it kind of took on a life of its own, which was really fun. And then the other big mechanism we did for culture was we took and we did our all hands meetings. So about every 6 weeks, we would do an hour to hour and a half all hands meeting. I looked at the way I phrased the all hands meetings is it was a board update that I was giving the employees. So we were very transparent there from a financial standpoint, hiring projections, budgets, bookings. We were using virtually identical slides that I was sharing with the board. And I really looked at it as like a time for us to be really transparent with the team. And I told them like, okay, now I'm going to give you guys a board meeting. And that's a lot of what we did with the all hands. The other thing we did with the all hands was we did kind of make it out to be like a celebration every time we did it. And we also made it kind of funny. So we had just lots of like silly cartoons and pictures and
yeah,
references
yeah.
and stuff like that in the deck. So it was, I wasn't. They were a lot of fun, but I think you would certainly question our seriousness if you had seen those decks as an outsider. But I think it actually made it really fun. So
Yeah, I saw a number of those decks. It was, my time walking the halls at Logic, I mean, it was an intense situation. You guys were gearing up to sell, and even before that, navigating what should we do. There was some intensity there, but there was a whole lot of fun too. There was a really cool balance, was,
mhm.
from an outsider's perspective. Yeah, so you just shared, I was going to ask about what you did to create this culture. You just gave us some great examples. You've probably heard me say this because I say it all the time. I really do believe that culture is a reflection of its leader. And one of the things, my experience of you, I know you're more of a we versus an I kind of leader, which I really appreciate. And I imagine the people around you appreciate that. You give a lot of credit where credit is due. You don't take more than your share. And you just shared about what people did within the organization to really create that culture. I am curious, in retrospect, what would you have done differently as a leader? If culture really is a reflection of you as the leader, what could you have done differently? What was the lesson learned here? Not as a way to like smack yourself for it, but what was the learning in this journey for you around culture?
I think there were still some times where I just wasn't patient enough. I think I just got caught at the wrong time, and I think I regret every single one of those instances where you just
Huh.
kind of get angry, frustrated, and negative. And I wouldn't say it was frequent, but certainly like if you interviewed people, they'd be like, "Yeah, Chris got fairly pissed off a few times," and I wish I hadn't. It was always the wrong thing to do, But I think it just sort of happens at some point. So that
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest thing. There was always just a lot of like little nitpicky things I don't think we ever got right. Like, and you and I talked about some of this stuff, and some of it's kind of ridiculous. Well, I don't know. It's stuff like office, like how often people should be in the office and working from home and remote and all of that. I just don't feel like we ever really nailed that. I think generally it was okay, but I think some people would have been better off, especially younger people in their career being in the office. And I think we probably did suffer some productivity on that, is my guess. I think the other thing we did was I was too careful with money in the beginning. And, just because I had gone through like some tough times with big machines and running out, we literally ran out of cash at big machines a couple times. And I just never wanted that to happen. I remember there was one time where it's like, well, can we not pay our health insurance? It's like, are you crazy? Like you have to pay your health insurance, and just having those kinds of conversations. And that
Yeah.
made me too careful early on. And I think Blake Grubbs would certainly back me up on this, where we should have spent a lot more money with him and marketing. And we should have, I mean, he did a fantastic job with a pretty small budget at the beginning. And then his budget did increase, but we should have done more of that sooner. We should have hired Christina for HR sooner. We should have spent those spent those dollars. I think I was a little too stingy, and it did kind of stunt our growth, I think,
Hmm,
early on.
hmm.
So yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me and with the folks listening. And I would love to hear what you are most proud about. And I'm not looking for what you're proud about that the team did. I'm actually, what are you proud about how you showed up for the company and for the organization?
Well, I mean, I'm really proud of the outcome. I I wish I could kind of share the numbers, but ServiceNow was did a good job acquiring the company, and I think I've already heard people say internally at ServiceNow, like pretty senior folks, like Logic's like the best acquisition we've ever done already, and we're 7 months in. So I'm really proud of that. Like, it's kind of like you buy the house you can't really afford, and then it's like you enjoy it way more than you ever thought you would, type of a deal.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a win, kind of a win-win, I think.
I learned something about you as a leader in one of the last meetings we had. This was right before you officially went over to ServiceNow. If my memory serves me, I mean, we were in a leadership meeting, and you just expressed how important it was that Logic integrate really effectively and successfully into ServiceNow. It wasn't like, hey, we got to cross the finish line, let's party. Like, you really talked about the importance of making this a success for ServiceNow. And I have to imagine not everyone that sells their company is that thoughtful or that interested in that outcome more than their own outcome of, making the sale happen. Anything you want to share about why that was so important to you?
It still is.
It's still right, yeah.
Yeah, it still is. And I mean, obviously, when you have an outcome like this, you do kind of decompress a little bit and take some time to kind of regroup and all that stuff. But I mean, my foot's back on the gas. You know, I'm
Yeah,
still trying to earn my keep here because it is important to me. So
yeah.
yeah,
I love that. And I mean, ServiceNow is lucky to have your company, but also someone at the helm that isn't just caring about, running off with the riches. So really cool.
yeah. It's
I think it
important
says
to
a
me.
lot about you.
I want people to look back and say, hey, this was a great deal and it was a great company and it really accelerated our ability to sell CRM in the business and it is important to me. And obviously, I've had interactions with Bill McDermott, who's a fantastic guy and just a legendary CEO, and obviously he helps reinforce that like work ethic and one of his key things is stay humble and hungry. And I think and he not only says it but he believes it and disseminates that belief into the org, which just sort of aligns with where I want us to go with the business. So
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about a couple more things before we put a pin in this one. I want to talk about legacy. People define legacy in lots of different ways. It's really easy for me to say, man, what a legacy you already have. Yet, when I think about you and what I know about you, the word humble comes to mind. The word modest comes to mind. Like, my experience, that you're not showy. I don't see you as really being all that attached to how people are thinking about you in the world. Am I right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I collect old cars. I guess people might say that's kind of showy, but yeah, I think it's accurate. I do waste
Well,
money on a few things, but not a lot.
yeah, but you don't collect. I mean, you do collect cars, but you actually get under the hood and make the cars better. You work on the cars,
Yeah.
which is really cool. Not all collectors do that. So, it's funny. Aside from just knowing you, I did some research on you, and I read about what was said about you in the world. And you're kind of known as this like one of the few CPQ like godfathers, if there is such a thing. You're like one of the CPQ founders or guys. Like, does that mean anything to you? Is that important to you in any way?
Well, I think if you need help with CPQ, I'd be excited to help you.
Okay.
It's I don't know how to say this. I mean, I think CPQ is an interesting area, interesting technology, but I think it's not like I'm like going to fill a coliseum full of 100,000 people, right? It's not that big a deal. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. You started Logic. We talked about this. You started it in part because you wanted to see if you could do it. You wanted to prove to yourself that you could do it. and you did it. And so what meaning do you make of that? Like, again, I know you're not like a big ego-y type of guy, but is there some, I don't know, what does it mean to you that you actually achieved what you set out to achieve?
Well, it means a lot. I mean, it was very rewarding. It's aside from my family, it's the like most rewarding thing I've ever done. And I think I've always kind of had that attitude where, you have to keep running, otherwise you're going to get caught or you're going to get eaten or whatever. It certainly was that way when I got to MIT, when I was 19 and I sort of felt like the underdog, had the lowest SAT score of anybody I met there. You just
Huh,
kind of feel like you're always getting chased and you got to win. And
uh-huh.
it's kind of highly motivating, at least for me. And that was certainly true here at Logic. I wasn't sure that I could do it. And I think that uncertainty can be pretty motivating. At least for me, it is.
I love it. I don't know if I'm gonna do it, and that's enough to motivate me to see if I can. Everyone has their own motivations. I don't think there's, well, I was about to say, I don't know if there's a right or wrong motivation. I think certain motivations are healthier than others. That seems like a fairly healthy motivation to me. Not to necessarily prove to anyone else, or maybe it was. Like, is there anything else more there? Like, yeah, I know you want to prove to yourself you could do it,
Yeah. I, it's
but
sort
is
of,
there what was there anything you were proving to the world?
it wasn't to the world, it was to me.
Yeah.
I think, when I was MIT is an interesting place and I met a lot of people there and there was a group of people you meet there regularly that are just like off the charts, like brilliant, smart people. And it's a certain percentage of that school as with probably most schools. And those people are typically not like super motivated because they know they're smarter than everyone else.
Yeah, right.
They're sort of like calm. They sort of have like that calm like understanding, and maybe they're delusional. I don't know, but there are a lot of really really smart people that I met there that were successful, but they didn't really like work that hard, and it wasn't that important to them because they kind of
Sure.
knew. But for me, I always felt like I was kind of on my back foot at MIT,
Hmm.
and I think that fear sort of kept me going there, and it ended up doing pretty well there. And I think that
Yeah.
that constant fear sort of helped with logic too. Like, could I really do it? I was never
Yeah.
really sure. So
It's funny you brought that up. One of the questions I kind of skipped over because I'm looking at the clock was, how has fear been supportive for you in your life? And you just answered the question. Fear actually pushed me. I was the underdog. And so what is the actual fear? I get it that, these other guys are brilliant and I got to work my ass off to really to level up. But what was the actual fear? Again, maybe you haven't thought about it or articulated it, but for me to be enough, for me to, these are typical fears, for me to be good enough, worthy, to be seen as smart. Like, do you know what that fear actually was, being surrounded by all these geniuses at MIT?
well, I think it's just could you survive? Back then.
Ah, okay.
But I think at Logic it was just fear of just not being able to pull it off after giving it everything you got, and then it doesn't
Yeah.
work. Like that's a
Yeah.
shitty outcome, right? Nobody wants that, right? Where you can say I did everything I
Yeah.
could and it wasn't good enough. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the fear. But I think with me though, the problem is it's probably too much, and it caused me to make decisions that weren't the absolute best for the company. And then one of those was just like investing and spending. Like we it almost became like a joke in the board meetings. We would go through the financials with the board, and they're like, "Chris, you're not spending enough in X, Y, and Z areas." And then I'm like, "Okay, got it." And then we have the next board meeting, and it's still like, "You still didn't spend enough in these areas." You know, I think it's okay to have some fear to motivate you, but I think it can also be too much, and you tend to kind of stack the deck to sort of make sure you have an outcome. And what happens is the outcome maybe isn't as good as it could have been. And I think
Yeah.
that's the balance. That's the challenge.
Yeah. So, Chris, what do you hope people say about you when you're not in the room?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I think I'm somebody they can count on to make something happen if I commit to it. Somebody that could help them if they needed help. Those are probably the biggest things.
Yeah. I love it. And it's funny. I asked you about like what part of your identity relishes in this idea of being the CPQ guy, and your response was, "Well, if anyone needs help, I'm happy to help."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's just a helping one that lives within you, I think, and yeah, he's lovely to be around. I think people see him.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's fun to help people. It's fun to do that. I've been working it's kind of a random thing, but I've been working the elections in Illinois for
Hmm.
about 10 years. Just helping voters like register and get the right ballot. They call them judges here in Illinois, and I really enjoy doing that because at the end of the day, you've helped a couple hundred people and to make sure that they were able to vote or something was wrong in their registration and they kind of panic and you sort of help them. So it's a good feeling.
Couple more zingers here for you, Chris. What's the cost of your success that nobody sees?
It's a good that's a good question. I mean, I feel good about it. I mean, I don't have that much of a social life, I guess. Um, there's a lot of people my
Yeah.
age. There's a lot of people my age that have like these massive Facebook populations, and they're always out doing stuff. So
Well, right when this podcast airs, you're gonna get inundated with Facebook friends now because of this.
yeah, I don't know, Clay. I mean, I don't have a tremendous tremendous social life outside of work, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the cool thing about and I got to witness this, it's you really created some really cool friendships and partnerships within work. So there was some I like to think there was some really and I know it's not I mean, I know some of the people you worked with and you're friends with their wives and husbands and like there's real care there that I got to see.
Yeah, I've been
And I think
lucky.
that's pretty special.
I've been lucky. I've met some really cool people. Larry Ellison, Safra, Bill McDermott, Jensen Wong. We do a lot of business with NVIDIA, and I was over there one night, and they're very happy with our technology. And Jensen was in the room, and we ended up talking for
Yeah.
a while, and just so those experiences have been very fortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty incredible. So, the obvious question I ask most folks is what's next? And I know that you're really focused on ensuring that Logic thrives within the ServiceNow ecosystem. Anything else that's on your mind for next?
I mean, I've got several years at ServiceNow to help them and make sure the technology works, and then see if I can help out with other things and expand my responsibility with them. And I do really like the culture. I like the team. John Ball sponsored this acquisition from the beginning. He's a super fun guy to work for and runs a great team. And I'm very happy continuing to do that, for as long as needed, as long as they want me to do that. I don't think I've got another startup in me. So I don't think that's in the cards. I have been doing a little bit of philanthropy, which I really enjoyed doing, which has been fun. I'll
Hmm,
probably do more of that. And then I'd also like to do more board work.
hmm,
I'm involved in a couple companies and that's a lot of fun. And I would like to probably do more of that, especially companies that need help starting up in tech and what to do, what not to do, and how to help them with that stuff. That's been
yeah.
that's been fun.
Well, now your Facebook feed and your LinkedIn feed are really going to blow up. People are going to be coming out of the woodwork. You're going to have more friends than you want. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, cool. There's two questions I ask everyone right at the end of these shows. Here's the first one. If you could whisper one truth into every leader's ear, what would it be?
One truth. I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff that I think are really important. Probably the most important thing is the culture thing. That culture trumps strategy all the
Yeah,
time.
culture trumps.
And I think you gotta and people talk about this a lot, but I think you gotta really focus on culture. And every minute you can spend on that, making your culture as good as possible is gonna pay dividends. Makes everything else
Yeah,
easier. So
yeah, yeah. Cool. Here's the next question. What truth helps the giant in you rise up when fear drags you down?
what truth?
Yeah,
I think it's that if if you do the best job you can and run everything as well as you can, chances are it's gonna work. And that's one of the things that's I think when you're really fearful, that's really important to think about is stick to the plan, stick to the playbook, find a customer, make them happy, and and trust your playbook to run the business and focus on running the business really well. And then
yeah,
that's the best thing you can do to make sure you get the most aces, when the cards are dealt. So
yeah. Trust the playbook. I love it.
yeah.
Anything else you want to share or pitch or anything you got for us before we sign off?
I think if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I think you'll have my contact info, and just ping me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email. Happy to, have any conversations, especially around CPQ, if anybody needs help. So
Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate it. Well, it's been so fun. Right when I kicked this thing off, you were at the top of the list of folks I thought we'd have a really great conversation. Knowing how much you enjoy helping, I just imagine that a lot of what you shared today is going to plant a lot of seeds in a lot of entrepreneurs' minds. So thanks for sharing all of what you did. It was a lot of fun for me as well.
yeah, thank you, Clay, by the way, for all your coaching over the years. And I think you really helped us keep the culture moving in the right direction, keep the team aligned, keep the team focused. Because these companies are pressure cookers, and I think having you around to keep the team aligned was super, super helpful. So thank you for that.
Hmm. Yeah, it was an honor. I appreciate you sharing that. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Well, folks, that's another one in the books. I appreciate you sticking around and listening to all of what we had to share and all of the knowledge Chris had for us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please follow the show and join me, Clay Stelzer, each week as we stop pretending, we name our fears, and we remember what it takes to stand tall as the giants we already are. When leaders get real, they make it safe for others to do the same. So please subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts, share with other leaders, leave a review if you're inclined to do so, and help more people feel what's possible when fear doesn't run the show. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Clay.